In this video, I will be focusing on game theory. I will go over a brief history of it, as well as some influential contributors. Game theory has a strong mathematical backing. I will not be focusing on it today, however it is important to know that there is a math component. The concept of game theory revolves around decision-making in a competitive landscape. In game theory, the phrase zero-sum game is often included in explaining it. A zero-sum game is essentially when one party gains and the other party does not. I'm sure now you can see the competitive aspect of game theory. This diagram is referred to as the prisoner's dilemma. The story behind the chart is that two people just committed a crime and are being interrogated in separate rooms while being given plea deals. The chart explains how two rational people might not cooperate even though it seems rational to do so. The top left box offers the best case scenario for both prisoners, if they both confess. Top right offers the best scenario for prisoner 1, only 1 year in prison if he confesses and prisoner 2 denies. The bottom left box offers the best case scenario for prisoner 2, which is 1 year in prison while prisoner 1 serves 10 years. And the bottom right offers the best case scenario for both of them, 2 years each if they both deny. So how does this relate to game theory? The accomplices have now been made into opponents. Similar to a game of chess, they are now both thinking what will be the other's move, and their assumption will dictate their decision and ultimately their sentences. However, what game theory fails to take into consideration is the moral aspect of what happens concerning the guilt that the person feels if he sends his accomplice to prison. It is not seen as a factor in what the best case scenario is for the prisoner. I'm going to begin to talk about some influential contributors to game theory and why their game theory contributions were important. Reinhard Justus Reginald Selten, born in Breslau in Lower Silesia. His family exiled him and he was forced to move to Germany. Studied mathematics at Goethe University, Frankfurt. Won Nobel Prize in 1994, Germany's first Nobel Prize winner for economics. Well known for his work in bounded rationalism, considered one of the fathers of experimental economics. Earlier I mentioned that Selten was a contributor to bounded rationality. Bounded rationality is that the idea that an individual has a limited amount of rational decisions they can make within a day. Selten offered this as an alternative to mathematical decision-making concepts. Bounded rationality is similar to rational ignorance. This is when people don't engage in educating themselves on a subject because the satisfaction that they will receive from it will be less appealing than what the opportunity cost is. For example, educating yourself on how your complex 401k plan works in order to maximize profits, but you would rather play Xbox instead. The projected return of funds is less satisfying than the utility you'd receive playing video games. Experimental economics is the study of economic questions. Data is collected to test validity of economic theories. For example, coordination games like the prisoner's dilemma are played. How does experimental economics and bounded reality tie into game theory? Bounded reality explains the limitations that competitors face within themselves when making decisions, and experimental economics is the facts that drive the decision-making process for the individuals. John Harsanyi was another influential contributor to game theory. He was a Hungarian-American economist, obviously a contributor to game theory, but particularly Bayesian games, contributed to incomplete information analysis, and was also another one of the 1994 Nobel Prize winners. Incomplete information is when information is not known to at least one of the players. An example of an imperfect information game is when two players have matching pennies and the players must choose either heads or tails secretly. If the pennies match, player 1 wins. If they don't match, player 2 wins. The players know the rules of the game, but they don't know what the other player is going to do. That is imperfect information. Imperfect information is an important pillar of game theory. That is where the skills of understanding your opponent come into fruition. Bayesian games. A Bayesian game is an imperfect, incomplete information game where players don't know the payoff function, what the winner receives in the event of them succeeding.
To have a game, you need at least 2 players, sometimes called agents, or if you want to be really crazy, people. And you need payoffs for the players. You need to define the outcomes they can potentially get depending on how the game unfolds. And finally, you need rules for the game. Now, it's not always obvious how people will behave, even with players, payoffs, and rules clearly defined. That's why game theorists have a number of solution concepts for games, including the dominant strategy equilibrium, the Nash equilibrium, the subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, the Bayesian equilibrium, and the weak perfect Bayesian equilibrium. The most basic solution concept is the dominant strategy equilibrium. In a game, each player can have any number of possible strategies. One strategy strictly dominates another strategy if the player is always better off under that strategy no matter what other players do. If one strategy strictly dominates every other possible strategy a player could take, that strategy is a strictly dominant strategy. We have a dominant strategy equilibrium when all players play a strictly dominant strategy. Now let's look at the most famous game in game theory, the prisoner's dilemma. There are 2 prisoners, prisoner 1 and prisoner 2, and they each have a choice. They can testify against the other or they can keep quiet. If they both keep quiet, they both get off with a light sentence, which I'll represent with a payoff of 2. Prisoner 1's payoff is on the left, prisoner 2's is on the right. If they both testify, they both get a moderate sentence. I'll represent the moderate sentence by a payoff of 0. Right about now, keeping quiet is looking like the best option, but there's more to this game. If one testifies and the other keeps quiet, the one who testified will get off scot-free, and the one who kept quiet will get an extremely harsh sentence. They'll throw the book at him. Think about this game for a moment. Keeping quiet looks like a pretty good option if both prisoners could promise not to testify. But these prisoners only care about their own self-interest. So, both prisoners may tell the other they pinky swear not to testify, but they won't keep that promise. If prisoner 2 keeps quiet, prisoner 1 is better off testifying. If prisoner 2 testifies, prisoner 1 is better off testifying. Testifying is a dominant strategy for both players, so both testifying is the dominant strategy equilibrium. The prisoner's dilemma comes up in all sorts of situations. For instance, instead of prisoners, our players could be, say, oil companies. If both set a high price, they can sell for a high price, but each one has an incentive to undercut, in which case he will capture the entire market. The equilibrium outcome is for each company to charge a low price. The prisoner's dilemma isn't the only game with a dominant strategy, equilibrium. Here's a more complicated one. Can you tell which strategy is dominant? It's A for player 1, and it's E for player 2. So the dominant strategy equilibrium is AE.